Okay, so this is the third in a series of, I don't know how many, depending on how long we carry on, about Pesach, and we've chosen the Haggadah as our subject. So before we carry on in our Haggadah, oh, I've got a hand up there. Nachum, you wanted to say something? No? Where is he? Nachum? No.
No, I didn't want to say anything except to thank you. I mean,
right. You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay. So before we start again on the Haggadah, I just want to read you something which you will realize once I read it is something which has not been written this year. I wanted to read it to you because I think it's an important subject. And it also brings into stark contrast our Seder night this year to other years, and it's something for us to think about. So I'm going to read you this. It's a couple of pages, probably take about 3 or 4 minutes, and see what you think of this. Seder night, perhaps the most special night in the whole year. The night when the entire family come together to celebrate our freedom, our release from slavery in Egypt, and to declare to one another, Am Yisrael Chai. Children, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends all sit down together and recall the past, whether it is the past of their own family by eating the traditional recipes handed down from generation to generation, or whether it's discussing their own journey from slavery to freedom on a family or a national level. But why? Why is it that this night is so different from all other nights of the year? What are all the weird and wonderful rituals all about? The Matzah, the maror, the dipping, the leaning to the left, and so much more. Sure, we will answer this question later tonight when the children ask it during Seder. But is there something intrinsic about the entire Seder experience? Something deep in the psychological makeup of the Seder which has preserved it for all generations and all people? In order to answer this question, we must first understand what Seder night is all about. Seder night is about freedom. It's about our release from slavery, and in particular, our release from Egypt. But we need to go one step further back. To understand how we were released from slavery, we must first understand how we got to be slaves in the first place. The Haggadah tells us briefly that Arami Oved Avi V'Yered Mitzrayma V'Yagor Sham. Yaakov Avinu was treated badly by an Aramean, Lavan, and he went down to Egypt. But this is not the whole story by a long way. What was the real reason we ended up in Egypt? Because Yaakov and his family went down to Egypt to be with Yosef, who was Mishneh LaMelech in Egypt. He was the viceroy in Egypt. And what was Yosef doing in Egypt in the first place? He had been sold into slavery by his brothers 20 years earlier as a result of their jealousy of him and his dreams about leadership. By the way, the question arises, why didn't Yosef go to visit his father? Why did he make an old man come down to see him? The answer to this is that Yosef was still a slave. He may have been in command of the country, but he was not free to leave. He was chained metaphorically to Egypt. Even after he died, his bones had to wait over 200 years to be taken to be buried in the land of Israel. So we ended up as slaves in Egypt because of the sad and distressing story of the sale of Yosef by his brothers. The fact that Yaakov's sons were not able to speak to one another peacefully. The fact that they were not prepared to sit down with Yosef and discuss their grievances maturely and with brotherly love. The fact that they had different world views was not something they could tolerate. All this fractured nature of one family of brothers, all this led to our descent, both physically and mentally, into slavery. The disaster of exile from the land of Israel into Galut, into slavery, all stemmed from a lack of family unity, a lack of willingness to see another's point of view, and a desire to be the top one, the Bechor, the firstborn. The same was true of our exile at the hands of the Romans. The Gemara tells us that this was because of sinat chinam, hating one another for no reason. So if now we understand what got us into this mess of being slaves and in exile in the first place, we can begin to understand what we have to do to correct these mistakes, to undo the damage done, which resulted in loss of our freedom and our loss of the land of Israel. Because unless we confront our mistakes of the past and understand them and realize our errors, we will always be destined to repeat those errors. So if a fractured, dysfunctional family dynamic caused our problem, then a united, harmonious family experience is the tikkun, is the correction. And this is what Seder night is all about. Right at the beginning, we declare, Kol dichfin yeteva yechol, Kol ditzrich yeteva yifsach. Anyone who is hungry, come and eat. Anyone in need, come and join us for this Pesach. Immediately, we declare our intention that no one should be left on their own. We are one family, united and caring for another. A tikkun, a correction for our ancestors' poor behavior. The laws of the Korban Pesach tell us clearly that we must eat the Pesach offering together in our families. And if the family is too small for a whole Pesach offering, we must join up with other families, again displaying harmony and togetherness in place of strife and family arguments. The Haggadah tells of 5 rabbis sitting in Bnei Brak on Seder night, discussing matters all night until their students came to tell them it was time for Shacharit. Why is this story in the Haggadah? Chazal tell us that what these rabbis were discussing was contemporary politics, just like we do. It was the time of the Roman occupation of Israel, and they were discussing the tactics that should be used against the Romans. Rabbi Akiva was in favor of military action. He supported Bar Kokhba. Some of the other rabbis strongly disagreed and felt the Jews should take a pacifist approach. Others felt they should negotiate. What is noticeable is that they sat there all night talking about it. No one got up and stormed off because his view did not prevail. Each one listened to the other's point of view with respect. They may not have agreed, but there was dialogue. No one was thrown in a pit. No one was sold into slavery. This story has a hidden message to us. Correct the mistakes of the past. And of course, the 4 sons, 4 completely different sons, all with their own view of the world, one in a complete world of his own, so much so that he has nothing to ask even. But they are all around one table. For sure, the answer to the so-called wicked son is problematic because it's harsh, but that is another drasha for another day. The point is that the whole family is there together, a display of family unity, a correction for the disunity, fracture, and lack of brotherly love displayed by Yosef's brothers. So perhaps this is why Seder night is so enduring, because at the end of the day, we have enough enemies outside of our people. We do not need any inside our own families. We must understand that in order for us to be a successful family, a successful nation, we must respect each other's differences and behave accordingly. On a national level, we are still failing. The left won't speak to the right castigate the left. There's the religious secular divide, Ashkenazi versus Sephardi. We have a long way to go to repair the problem, but at least on a family and community level, tonight, as we sit with our families around the Seder, may Hashem help us to take a step towards tolerance, harmony, and unity, so that the errors of the past can be erased and the nation of Israel will be forever united in the land of Israel. Interesting words, I think. Just wanted to set the scene there, really. It's sad that so much of that will not happen this year, that we won't all be sat around with our families. We'll be on our own, most of us. So it's something for us to think about, that maybe there's some messages for us in that, about unity, family machloket, community machloket, national machloket. It's no good. It's not where we should be. And Seder night should be the time when we heal all of that. And perhaps while we're sitting in our solitary confinement this year, those are some thoughts for us to have during the Seder night. Okay, so that having set the scene, let's carry on where we left off. Hang on a minute, Paul wants to say something. Hang on, Paul. Your unmute's not working. Can you try and unmute yourself? Yeah.
Just wanted to ask whose words they were.
I'll tell you at the end, if I may. Okay, I'll tell you at the end. So let's carry on where we were. We spoke last week. Was it last week? No, it was earlier this week, wasn't it? We spoke about yachatz, about the washing of the hands. And after washing of the hands without a bracha, either the Baal HaSeder alone or everybody else, depending on your minhag, as we discussed last time, we come to Karpas, which is not a Hebrew word. Anybody know where Karpas comes from? Any ideas where the word Karpas comes from? Karpas, I believe, is a Greek word, which means aperitif. Comes from the Greek word for aperitif, which is exactly what it is, of course. It is that which we eat before the main meal. Karpas is a vegetable. Let's just have a quick. Let's just have a quick show of hands. Hands up, those who use parsley for their karpas. Well, I'm going to have half a hand up for me because that's what we used to do in my parents' house. So quite a lot for karpas, for parsley. Okay, hands up those that have potatoes. I'm going to have my other hand up for potatoes because that's what we use in our house now. Okay, so Paul, you had your hands up for both as well. Okay, good for you. All right. What other vegetables? Hands up if you don't use parsley and you don't use vegetables. Let's see what other. Harvey, let me unmute you. What do you use, Harvey? No, you're not. My unmute doesn't seem to be working. Can you unmute yourself? Yes.
Cucumber.
Cucumber. Harvey and Helen use cucumber. Anyone else use any different vegetables? Okay, so apart from cucumber for Helen and Harvey, everybody seems to use parsley or potato. It's interesting. Let me just ask you, Helen and Harvey, why I've managed to unmute you this time. Why do you use cucumber?
Because my Seder used cucumber.
And where was your Seder from?
From Krakow.
Krakow, okay, in Poland. All right. That's interesting. It doesn't fit in with my theory, but my theory is this: those people whose ancestors came from Eastern Europe, Far Eastern Europe, and were of a Hasidic bent, they tended to use potatoes. The reason being that potato was the most frequently found vegetable. Green vegetables in Eastern Europe, which was a very cold climate, sometimes at Pesach being sometimes quite early in the year, in the solar year, the green vegetables weren't always available, and so potatoes, which were not dependent on so much on the sunshine, the potatoes became the most common one. Parsley was more used in Western Europe, in the countries that we would call Ashkenaz, so Germany, France, the Rhineland. They were the ones that would use parsley because parsley was a commonly found vegetable there. Most of us who use parsley in our homes are probably taking it from Minhag Anglia, the English Minhag, which is of course largely based on Minhag Ashkenaz, largely based on the Yekaz Minhagim, and so therefore lots of us would use parsley. Let me just ask Stanley, in the Ukraine, what would you use?
In Ukraine, probably we will use potato.
Potato.
In Ukraine, it wasn't so, common to make a Seder.
Right. Okay.
Have very strange Seder. It mostly was like a body.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll get you to talk about that at some point in the future. Jeffrey, let me ask you. Jeffrey Glasky comes from a very long line of Sephardim. What did the Sephardi families in the Spanish and Portuguese community use?
They used parsley, but I have seen some Sephardim use leeks, and in fact, they went so far as to wave them around in the air. We went to a communal Seder many years ago, and there were a lot of Sephardim there, and they were almost standing on the table, waving giant leeks in the air.
Sounds great fun.
Yeah. Ours were a little bit more subdued than that and formal, but yeah, parsley and leeks.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you for that. Of course, I will remember many of the Sedarim in Jeffrey's house, because almost every second Seder of my childhood was spent with Jeffrey's parents in their house. I'll come back to that when we talk about Manishtana. Yes, Harvey?
Yes, the Sephardim that waved the leeks must have been the Welsh Sephardim.
Thank you for that. Okay, so it's interesting that we all have different things that we use, but basically it's a vegetable. And the thing that we do with it is we dip it in salt water. Now, everybody knows what the salt water represents. The salt water represents the tears of the Bnei Yisrael when they were having their back-breaking work as slaves in Egypt. But the question arises, what is the combination of this aperitif, this karpas, and the tears? What's the combination? Why do we combine the karpas, which is in some ways a symbol of freedom? Why is it a symbol of freedom? Because it's an aperitif. Only fancy people have an aperitif. If you're a slave, you don't have a first course, a main course, and a dessert. You're lucky if you get a bit of matzah, lechem oni, the bread of our affliction, a bit of matzah and something to go with it. You certainly don't have aperitifs, and you don't have dips around. So the karpas, the idea of the pre-meal aperitif, is a sign of liberty. It's one of the signs in the Seder which represents liberty. And yet, we dip it into the salt water to demonstrate that we have the slavery, the symbol of slavery as well. It's the tears of slaves. So again, we spoke about this last time, and there is this tension, this paradox almost, that the Seder night is a reflection of both slavery and also liberty. And I'd like to suggest to you that this year, this is more poignant than ever. It struck me that, and I never thought of this before really, only this year, that the line between liberty and freedom is a very thin line indeed. Who would have imagined a month ago, 6 weeks ago, even 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that we would be contemplating having a Seder all on our own? Nobody would have even contemplated such a thing before this coronavirus plague that we have at the moment. Nobody would have even considered that. We all thought that we were free, we could do whatever we want, and now look at us, we can't even go more than 100 meters outside of our own house. And I'm going to come back to that in some more detail when we speak about the next part, which is Magid. But it struck me that this year perhaps demonstrates to us why the karpas goes together with the salt water. Because really, sometimes it can be very difficult to distinguish between one and another. Are we free or are we slaves? We have to think about that. We are, in fact, been put in a position this year where we're not entirely free. And it gives us some food for thought, if you'll pardon the pun, around what really is freedom, what really constitutes freedom. Is it physical freedom? Is it intellectual freedom? Or is it religious freedom? There's all sorts of different freedoms that we need to consider. And Karpas in salt water demonstrates to us perhaps the fragile nature of that freedom, and that perhaps the salt water, the bitterness of not being free, is not always that far away. Another thing about Karpas, which I think is worth mentioning, which I did not know until 2 years ago. I think I mentioned to you on the first shiur that the Haggadah that I have here is the Haggadah of Bnei Akiva Perth. I was fortunate enough to be in Perth 2 years ago for Pesach, and this was the Haggadah that they were using. And in it is some very nice little explanations, some of which I hadn't seen before. And there's one here on Karpas which I'd like to share with you. The word Karpas, which we have said actually is not a Hebrew word, nothing is coincidence. Let's look at the word Karpas and break it down into its letters. Kaf. What is a kaf? The letter kaf, obviously, but what does the word kaf mean? Here's our Hebrew expert, Nechama.
A hand.
A hand, that's right. A palm of a hand. Kaf is a hand. Okay, reish. What is a reish? I don't think any of you will get this because it's not the head, as you might think. Rosh means a head. Reish also means a poor person. Reish is another word for a poor person. And so what the Karpas is coming to tell us, the beginning of the Karpas, is to tell us that we need to open our kaf, we need to open our hand to the reish, to the poor people. Now that doesn't always necessarily mean financial assistance to people who need it, because let's look at the end of the word. We've done the kaf, we've done the reish, we now pay, the letter pay. What does peh mean in Hebrew? What does peh mean? Harold, I saw you mouthing it.
Mouth.
Mouth, that's right, mouth. Peh means a mouth. So it's not just with financial means that we can open our hands and help those who are in need, but also with our mouth we can give people support, we can give people chizuk, we can support one another by speaking to them, by giving them good counsel, by being an ear there for somebody who has trouble to listen to them, and to try and help them out by giving them our advice, our time. And finally, samech. What does samech mean? What's the word samech mean? Any offers? Johnny Halpern.
To close.
Samech means
to close.
Close, yes. It means to be close or to support. To support. Lismoch means to support, means to rely on. Lismoch means to rely on. Remember, we've had this before, the word smicha. Smicha is somebody who leans. You get when you have smicha. Moshe gave smicha to Yoshua by leaning on him with his hands. So samech means that we've got somebody to lean on. So Karpas is in some ways exactly what the author of those words which I read to you before was talking about. Karpas, the kaf reish, open your hand to those who are needy, not just with your hand, meaning your financial assistance, but also your pay and your samech. Give them your time, give them your advice, and be there to support them. So the word karpas, although it's not a Hebrew word, somebody has very cleverly pointed out that we can use those letters to demonstrate what Seder night should all be about, which is the tikkun of the fractured people, to be there for our people, those who are less fortunate, to open out our palms for them, our mouths, and to be a support for them. So that was just something on Karpas. Another thing about Karpas, hang on, Vivian, I think, has got her hand up. Yes, Vivian?
I would just like to point out that the 500 shekels, yes, which people are being given by the government, this morning on the program, the morning program, the person who was giving it said, and with the 500 shekels, why don't you, if you really don't need it at the moment, give it to somebody else who you know needs it and help them, which I thought was a very nice gesture. And he opened his mouth and said it. and he's going to open his hands and do it.
Excellent. Thank you, Vivian. I hadn't heard that myself.
Did you hear me?
We heard you. Yes, we all heard you.
No.
Thank you. Yeah, we heard you, Vivian. Can you hear us?
Johnny, did you hear what I said?
Yes, we did, Vivian. We heard it very clearly.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you, Vivian. That's a very nice idea. So that really fits in very nicely with our Karpas. Something else about Karpas before we move on. We say a bracha before Karpas. We say a bracha, and obviously the bracha is the bracha of Borei Peri Ha'adama, because all the things that we use, whether it be parsley, whether it be potato, whether it be cucumber, are all vegetables which grow in the ground. And therefore we make the bracha Borei Peri Ha'adama. A halachic point for you all to remember, most of you will know this, but it's worth repeating. When you say the bracha of Borei Peri Ha'adama for Karpas, you have in mind that Borei Peri Ha'adama is going to also fulfill the need for a bracha when you're going to eat the bitter herb later on. The bitter herb, whether you use lettuce or whether you use horseradish or whatever else you might use, we'll come to that later on, is going to be a vegetable. And therefore, we do not say, you'll notice in the Haggadah, we do not say a separate bracha for Borei Peri Ha'adama, for the maror. We have a different bracha, we have a special bracha, but the Borei Peri Ha'adama that you say for Karpas needs to be borne in mind that you're going to have that bracha is going to count, as it were, for the maror later on. I'm sure most of you knew that, but it was worth repeating. Okay, so that is Karpas. Anybody want to talk about Karpas? Anything that you want to share about Karpas before we move on to the next thing? Faye.
I have a question. When you are eating something that you make a bracha for, how long is that bracha good for? Isn't it like 72 minutes basically?
Okay. So
what happens if you wait? So what happens if you have a long Seder? Say it takes 2 hours till you get to Maror.
Okay. So that's a very good question. And the answer is that you have, as long as you require, as long as you continue to have in mind. Now, when you're doing your Seder, the whole time you're involved in that mitzvah. So it can be 4 or 5 hours. It doesn't matter, because the whole time you are involved in the Seder and it's involved in that mitzvah, and therefore it's never left your mind. It might be just gone to the back of your mind whilst you do the rest of the Seder, but it's never left your mind that you're going to eat maror. You know you're going to eat this maror, whether it's in 72 minutes or 60 minutes or 120 minutes, whenever it's going to be. And the 72-minute thing is also not set in stone, because if you have him to say a bracha and then you're going to do the mitzvah, if you have a hefsek, what's called a hesek adat, if your mind wanders away from the mitzvah, even if it's 2 minutes, then it's no good. For example, where do we see that? We see that after we have washed our hands for netilat yadayim. You're all aware that we don't speak until we have eaten the bread for hamotzi, or on Pesach, the Matzah for hamotzi. So why don't we speak? Why do we all go instead of speaking? Because the mitzvah of washing your hands and eating the bread is all part of one mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to wash your hands and say the bracha, and then to say the bracha on the bread. It's all one mitzvah. So if you wash your hands and then you then say to somebody, what were the football scores yesterday? Then your mind has gone away from this mitzvah and it's no longer considered connected to the other part of the mitzvah. And therefore, you're not allowed to interrupt. Now, just to talk about that, what it doesn't mean is if you want the salt for the bread or you need the knife, you don't have to go, because asking for the salt and the knife with words is not an interruption of this mitzvah. You need the knife to cut the bread. You need the salt to dip the bread into. So it is perfectly okay for you to wash your hands say al natilat yadayim, sit down, and if there is no knife, you could say, does anybody know where the knife is? You could alternatively get off your backside and go and get it yourself, but that may be too difficult. And you don't have to say, you can say, could somebody please pass me the salt if it's down the other end of the table, because that is connected to the mitzvah. So it's not talking per se that's the problem. The problem is interrupting in the middle of a mitzvah. And the same goes, Faye, to answer your question. When you say the Brei Pri Adama on the Karpas, you're having in mind it's all one mitzvah. This whole Seder night thing that we're doing is all one mitzvah, and we're not having any extraneous interruption before we get to the Maror. The question would be, what if you did interrupt and you decided that you were going to go off in the middle and say, I think I'll have a break now and I'll go and read a Jeffrey Archer novel for an hour? Well, then, yes, you would have to say another Brei Pri Adama when you got back and said your Maror, because you had done an interruption. You had a Hesach Hadat. You had an interruption of the mitzvah. So that's the answer to that question. Any other questions on Karpas or any comments on Karpas before we move along? Okay. So, oh yes, Michael. Michael, hang on, let me unmute you. Yes, Michael.
Hi, it's not directly relating to Karpas, but the person who's leading the Seder is constantly talking about what's going on in the Seder, why we're doing it, etc., etc. So there is an interruption in that respect.
But that falls into the same category as please pass me the knife, please pass me the salt. It's part of the mitzvah. The mitzvah, remember, is magid. The mitzvah is levehigadata lavincha. The mitzvah is to discuss what's going on. The mitzvah is to explain what's going on to everybody around. So the Baal HaSeder, who's telling you all what's going on along, is actually doing that mitzvah. It's part of the mitzvah. It's exactly the same part of the mitzvah as cutting the bread is in our previous example. If he was to start discussing extraneous matters which had nothing to do with the Seder, then your question would be a valid question and would need consideration.
Point taken.
Who's over here? Shoshi.
If you write it the other way around.
If you write Karpas the other way around, what do you get?
Sifrecha or Sapercha.
Sapercha, very nice. Beautiful, beautiful. Have you just noticed that yourself? Is that something wonderful? Okay, what Shoshi is telling us is that Karpas, spelt the other way around, is Saper, which means to tell, Sipor Yetziat Mitzrayim, Sapercha. Tell it for yourself or tell it to yourself. This time, maybe it's really poignant because we're going to have to tell it to ourselves, many of us here. Sapercha, lovely. I like that idea. Thank you, Shoshi, very much. Thank you. Okay, excellent, excellent. Right, so Karpas. Now we come to yachatz. Yachatz. What is the root of the word yachatz? Any offers for the root of the word yachatz? Nechama, help us out.
Arrow.
Okay. Chetz is an arrow, but I don't think that's the root. Let's just go back a step. What is yachatz? Yachatz is where we break the matzah, not really in half. This was always my favorite question as a kid. This is how annoying I was as a kid.
Does it not come from Mechitza, Johnny?
It does come from Mechitza, yes. Yeah. When I was a kid, my Haggadah always used to say, break the matzah in half and put the larger half away for the afikoman.
Chetzi.
Thank you, yes. And so, in an irritating fashion, I always used to ask, how can you have a bigger half? If it's a bigger half, it's not a half. But the word yachatz, as Faye has pointed out, comes from the word chetzi, to half. So yachatz means to break in half the matzah. So we break in half the middle of the three matzot, and we put the larger half away for afikoman, which we will eventually come to. Now, we need now to understand why we have 3 matzot in the first place. Why do we have 3 matzot, and why are we going to break one of them in half? Okay, why do we have 3 matzot? Any offers? Here we go, Nechama.
As much as I remember, it is Israel, Levi, and Yehuda.
Kohen, Levi, Israel, I think is what you mean. Kohen, Levi, Israel. That's three matzot for three categories. That's right, but there's a halachic reason why we have it as well. Faye, have you got your hand up there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's making a sandwich out of the matzahs there, which is ultimately what we do with the matzah. We make a sandwich.
Okay, but we're going to make
have
a
the
sandwich.
afikomen in the middle, the chetzi matzah in the middle, with the 2 whole ones above and below.
Okay, it is a sandwich. You're quite right, and we're going to talk about a sandwich when we come to Hillel. But that's not why we have 3. Paul's got his hand up there. Paul.
Is it lechem mishnah for 2 of them and 1 for the sandwich afterwards?
Okay, yes, more or less, absolutely. The reason is that every Shabbat, every Chag, we need lechem mishnah. Elisheva's pointing out to me that she's been saying that for the last 5 minutes, but I never spotted her because she's over there making face masks. But more of that in later on. Yes, every Shabbat, every Chag, we have lechem mishnah. We have 2 loaves of bread, or we have 2 matzot. Now, that begs the question, why do we have 2 matzot? Why do we have 2 breads? Why do we have 2 loaves of bread for Shabbat and for Chag? And the reason, of course, as most people will know, is that it is to commemorate the fact that on Friday in the desert, they did not collect man on the Shabbat, as Johnny has just pointed out. They collected a double portion on Friday, which was to make do for Shabbat, where there would be no man to collect. So the 2 loaves that we have every Shabbat and every Chag denote the double portion of man on a Friday, which the Bnei Israel collected in the Midbar. So why don't we just have 2 on Seder night? Why do we have a 3rd one? Well, the answer is, as Paul has said, that if we were to break one of these in yachatz, then when it came to making hamotzi later on, we'd only have 1.5, and that wouldn't be 2. And we need to have 2 because Pesach is a Chag, and we have to commemorate the Lechem Mishnah, the double portion of Erev Shabbat. So we have 3. We have the top one and the bottom one, which denote the Lechem Mishnah, and the middle matzah is denoted or is there specially for the special mitzvah of the night, one of the special mitzvot of the night, which is achilat matzah. It is a special mitzvah on Seder night to eat matzah. It says so in the Torah. On this night you shall eat the Korban Pesach together with matzah and maror. We can't eat the Korban Pesach anymore, but we can still do the mitzvah dioraita, the Torah law of eating matzah. So we have a 3rd matzah specially for that mitzvah. Now that one does not require it to be a whole loaf. So it's okay if we break that one. So the one that we're breaking is the one which is for the special mitzvah of eating matzah. And in a way, it's also the one which is denoted for the special mitzvah of Korban Pesach. Remember back in the day when we had a Beit HaMikdash, every family would have a Korban Pesach, and if your family was too small, you'd join together with other families and you would have a Korban Pesach. And the last thing that you would eat on the Seder night would be a kazayit, at least an olive size of the meat of the Korban Pesach. And that would be the last thing you eat. What is the last thing that we eat at our Seder? Everybody knows, the afikoman. So the afikoman, which is half of this middle matzah, is in place of the Korban Pesach. It's our commemoration of the Korban Pesach. So it turns out that this middle matzah has a dual purpose. This middle matzah serves as the matzah which we use for the mitzvah deoraita of eating matzah, and it also serves as a commemoration of a mitzvah that we can't do because we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, but we eat the afikoman in place of that to remember that we will, please God, be doing that one day in the future, and that we did it in the past. So we have 3 matzot. The first one and the third one are for lechem mishnah. It's the 2 loaves of bread / matzah that we have on every Chag and every Shabbat. And the middle one is for matzah and afikoman. Somebody got their hand up there? Was that you, Nachum, or are you just gesticulating? No, he's just gesticulating. Okay. So that's the reason we have 3 matzot. And then we split the matzah, and we then have the afikoman. And of course, there's many people have the custom to hide the afikoman for the children to find later on, or coming to you in a sec, Paul. Some people have the minhag to hide the afikoman, and then the children have to find it and to get a present afterwards. And other families have a minhag that the afikoman sits next to the Baal HaSeder, and during the evening of the Seder, the children try and steal it away from the Baal HaSeder, and then they bargain for a decent present to give it back so that we can finish the Seder when we have to eat the afikoman. Those are the 2 different minhagim with afikoman, and I'll talk about the different origins of those minhagim in a moment. Paul, yes?
I just want to ask, you said that the middle matzah is for the mitzvah of eating the matzah. But then why do we say the bracha al achilat matzah before we eat the lechem mishnah matzah? We say it first. We don't say it afterwards, before the second.
Well, that's right. But if you remember, well, actually, when we get there, you actually end up eating for the mitzvah of matzah, you end up eating a bit of the smaller half and a bit of the lechem mishnah. Right. So your questions are absolutely right. When we say hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and we say al achilat matzah, right? We say 2 brachot. So the hamotzi lechem min haaretz goes on the lechem mishnah. The al achilat matzah goes on the middle one, the half of the middle one that we haven't yet left over from the afikoman that we're going to eat. Okay. So you're right. We have 2 brachot, and we actually eat from 2 of the matzot. Okay. So anybody, any other minhagim other than the 2 that I mentioned to do with afikoman? Nechama.
No, I don't know if it's with afikoman, but when I saw a very extreme religious people, they have to eat the whole matzah. And they push it and push it and
okay. So all right. So what Nechama is talking about is a very, very, very interesting subject, and it's one of my favorites. And it is the concept of a kazayit. How much is a kazayit? And I really don't want to rush that, because it's something which I enjoy so much that I'm going to share that with you in detail at another shiur. Helen's smiling. I think she's probably already heard this before in previous years. No, you've not heard it? Okay. It's one of my favorites. I definitely have spoken about this in Poleg in the past, but I'm not going to miss an opportunity for talking about the concept of kazayit, of an olive size, and that's what Nechama is referring to. It's all about how much you have to eat of the matzah, and we'll come to that in due course. Okay, so the 2 minhagim. Hang on a minute. Shoshi and David want to say something. Yeah.
I've gone on to that backwards.
Okay.
Just read it backwards.
Yachatz.
Yeah. Tzachi.
Tzachi, which means laughter.
Pure. Okay. And it brings you to Yitzchak.
Okay.
Which was one it's more Kabbalistic, I would come here.
Yitzchak and the Haggadah.
And Haggadah. It's more on the Kabbalistic side.
Okay, all right, excellent. Okay, so Shoshi has decided that this year she's going to read the entire Haggadah backwards, and she will.
It as interesting.
She will report back to us after Seder night. We always used to say at the end of our Seder the next day when we were kids, oh, what time did you finish? Oh, we finished at 4 o'clock in the morning. Oh, well, we finished at 4:30 in the morning. Shoshi's going to tell us what time she started after, because she's going to start in the end.
It's related.
Everything is the other way around.
Yeah, it's related to the upside down life we're leading at the moment.
Absolutely,
That's
absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that contribution. Okay, so let's go back to our Afikoman minhag. We hide the Afikoman here now. I think I don't know, let's find out. Hands up, those of you who have the minhag to hide the Afikoman as opposed to steal it. Just about everybody. Does anybody have the minhag to steal it? Anybody heard of the minhag to steal it? No, that the first time you've, yeah, Helen.
I think that...
Michael? Somebody said. Faye?
What are you talking when you're saying hide it or steal it? Who's the one hiding and who's stealing?
Okay,
and I've been at both.
Okay.
And I've been at both.
Okay, let me explain the two minhagim. The minhag that we have all had, and you've all put your hands up to it, is that the Baal HaSeder, or somebody on behalf of the Baal HaSeder, takes the Afikoman, which is wrapped up in some kind of bag or a napkin or something, and they go and hide it. And when it comes time to eat the Afikoman, the kids go and find it, and whoever finds it gets the Afikoman present. Well, that's what we all do. In the Hasidic world, the minhag is very different. The minhag in the Hasidic world is that the Baal HaSeder keeps pretends at least to keep the Afikoman safe next to him on the table with his hand on it so that nobody can get hold of it, because it's very, very important. We can't finish the Seder without it. So the kids then try throughout the evening, and it's another thing that to make the kids ask and to keep the kids interested, the kids have to sneak up behind him, and when he goes to raise his hand to lift up the cup of wine or what have you, they whip it away and they take it away. And then when it comes to eating the Afikoman, the Baal HaSeder says in dramatic form, "Oh my goodness me, where's the Afikoman? We can't finish the Seder with Afikoman. We've lost it. Whoever can find the Afikoman will get a wonderful prize." And then the kid that's nicked it comes along and says, "Oh, I've got it, Tati. Look, I've got it, and I get a prize." And that's the minhag in the Hasidic world. I think that the reason that minhag fell into disrepute, or at least I'd like to think that this is the reason that minhag fell into disrepute in our generation, in perhaps in previous generations, was that I don't think that's very good chinuch for our children to teach them to come along and be sneaky and to steal from their parents. But there are still many families who do keep that minhag, and if that is the minhag of your family, which it appears that none of us is, then that will be something that you could do. But we don't do that. We do it the other way around. Yes, Faye?
That is the minhag of the Seder I always go to is my cousin, who is married to a Bukhari. And that is exactly what they do.
Okay, that's interesting. Didn't know that. So the Bukhari keep that minhag. Interesting. Okay, right. So we're on yachatz. We're on yachatz. I wanted to say something else about yachatz. What was I wanted to say about yachatz? Yes. Okay. So there is another significance that I want to discuss about the breaking of the middle matzah. Matzah, as you know, and that perhaps we'll finish with this now because we're nearly finished in time. Matzah, as you know, has a dual purpose. It's part of this tension of liberty versus slavery that we have in the Seder. What do I mean by that? Matzah is described as lechem oni, the bread of my affliction. It's the bread that the slaves ate when they were in slavery. They never had time to allow their bread to rise. Those of you who make bread will know that you can't rush the process. The bread has to be allowed to rise. You have to leave it in the sunshine or in some heat to allow the bread to rise, and that takes time. And the one thing that a slave does not have is time, because his taskmaster is on his back saying, come on, your lunch break's over now, you've had 10 minutes, off you go back to work. So they had to make matzah, which was made very quickly. Matzah has to be completed in 18 minutes maximum, or else it's not matzah. So, matzah represents the bread of our affliction. It represents the bread that they eat as slavery. But it also represents the bread of our freedom, because we speak about matzah being the type of food that the Bnei Israel ate when they left Mitzrayim, because they left in such a rush. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, right, you're out, off you go. There's no time to mess about. They had their coats on, they had their belts on, they had their staffs in their hand, and they were ready to roll. And as soon as HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, right, get out, out they went. There was no time to mess about, no time to allow the bread to rise, and therefore the matzah is what they ate when leaving Mitzrayim. So on the one hand, matzah represents slavery, and on the other hand, it represents freedom. And so the Ibn Ezra explains something very interesting. It's actually scientifically incorrect what the Ibn Ezra says, but the idea is a nice idea. The Ibn Ezra says that why was it that slaves were given matzah? Not just because it's quick to bake, but because it takes longer to digest and it removes hunger for longer than ordinary bread. Okay, so that's what the Ibn Ezra says. It's true, it's hard to digest, but actually scientifically it's not true. There is something. Any of you who are diabetics will know that there is something called the glycemic index. And those foods with a low glycemic index are digested more slowly and release their energy more slowly and make you satisfied for longer. And those are actually the wholemeal grains and not refined white flour. So the fact that it's leavened or unleavened makes no difference to the glycemic index, which the Ibn Ezra didn't know. But the concept is a nice concept, that if you're less hungry for longer periods of time, that means that you won't need another break to eat, and that's what slaves did. So the idea of yachatz, of splitting the middle matzah, is that now at the beginning we've got the matzah which represents slavery, and at the end the afikoman, which is, as we said before, a commemoration of the Korban Pesach. That is the aspect of matzah which denotes freedom. So we have matzah meaning two things, and therefore the idea of yachatz is that we are demonstrating almost that the same thing that can be something representing freedom can, if we do the right thing and we think about it the right way, can also represent freedom. I said that wrong. The thing that can represent slavery, the thing that can enslave us, can also liberate us. And we see that in our own lives, don't we? We see that with this thing that we're on at the moment. We're on this thing called Zoom. We're on this thing called a computer. We're on this thing called the internet. The internet can enslave us. How many people, sadly, are addicted to online gambling, online games, online porn, online work even. People are addicted and are enslaved to this computer. But at the same time, this same computer can liberate us. Look at what we're doing now. Look at how many shiurim, how many words of chizuk, how many words of comfort, how much help has been given out to our community, to the whole world who are suffering from this this terrible time at the moment, all through the computer. So just, I think the matzah is an idea that we can think about how many things that there are in our lives which can either be one of my wife's favorite sayings. They can either be a very good servant or a very bad master. If you're over on top of them and you can use these things correctly, like the computer, it can be a great servant. But if it becomes a master to you and you're enslaved to it, then it can be very, very bitter indeed, as many people have seen. So the idea of yachatz, of splitting that middle matzah, I think also gives us some pause for thought. Stanley, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say interesting things as Pop and Mawad, you remember me because I heard that actually people are free who can handle their own time as they would like to. And what is interesting, there's probably only one time that we are on this Pesach is really free because we can handle our time, not movement, but time as much as we want to. Because usually we all preoccupied. We have to go to work, we have to do this, we have to. But we don't have to, right?
Right.
We can do anything we want.
There is so much that this enforced problem that we have. It's a dreadful problem. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants anybody to die. Certainly we don't want people to be ill and dying across the world. None of that do we want. But what we have to try and do is find something positive out of it. And if we're using our time in a more constructive manner, then that's something, a small crumb that we can take from that. Before I finish, anybody got anything else that they would like to add? Okay, Paul.
You were going to tell us who wrote the words.
I was, yes. Okay, so, but I'm going to ask first of all, who would like to suggest who wrote those words? Jeffrey, who wrote those words?
Rabbi Dan.
Rabbi Dan. Jeffrey has suggested that those words were written by my son. Incorrect. Johnny Halpern.
Elisheva.
Incorrect. Next, anybody else? Faye, who wrote those words?
Ravi Doe.
No. Paul.
Barbara.
Rabbi Sachs.
Rabbi Sachs. No. Any other offers? Nechama.
I think you wrote them.
Yes, correct. Nachum was the only one that was listening to me when I gave the drasha 3 or 4 years ago in Shul on the first night of Seder. That was the drasha. First night of Seder, Ravi Doe is always with his family in either in Haifa or in Kiryat Ashon, not this year, sadly. And he's never there on the first night of Seder, so I usually do the drasha. And that was the drasha that I gave 3 or 4 years ago on Seder night. So yes, well done, Nachum. I wrote those words. Yes, Barbara.
Would you be able to send them out?
I guess so. I printed them out, so I suppose I must have it somewhere on my computer.
If you have a moment, I'd like to read them again.
Okay, I'll find them. I'll try and find the document and send it along. Anyone else got anything else to say before we wrap up? Okay, let's say goodbye. We'll see you all tomorrow for Kabbalat Shabbat, hopefully. I'm going to unmute you so you can all say your goodbyes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Johnny, I think Rabbi Balkan.
Thank you.
Rabbi Balkan would have said
Thank you.
Johnny?
Rabbi Balkan would have said the computer is trafe.
Yeah, you're right. He would have done. He would have done.
Johnny,
when are we Trafer something? What did he used to say, Johnny? Trafer Dodger. That's what he used to call you. A Trafer Dodger. That's right.
Not me, you.
No, not me. No, I was never a Trafer Dodger.
Johnny.
Yes, Faye.
Trying to make it.
Faye, what did you want to say, Faye?
when are we going to continue? We've only done 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We did 2 each time.
Okay, we're going to do another one Monday. And then probably maybe Tuesday, who knows? We'll do as many as we can.
Thank you, Johnny. That was terrific.
Thank you. Thank you.
Phone runs.
I'll do it now and see if there's any phone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.